When a mysterious document paralyzes an entire company, the solution comes from where no one expected, and a promise made on impulse becomes the spark for a turnaround no one will ever forget. The alarm clock went off at 4:30 in the morning, as always. Nancy Smith reached out with her wrinkled hand to silence it before it woke the rest of the household. In the dark, her movements were automatic, the result of years following the same routine. She got up slowly, feeling the weight of her 48 years on her tired back, and walked to the tiny bathroom of the small apartment in the outskirts of Riverside. The cold shower water woke her completely, chasing away the last traces of sleep. As she dressed in the light blue uniform of Tech Nexus, Nancy glanced at the clock. 5 o'clock. Perfect, she was on schedule. In the kitchen, she prepared strong coffee and packed the lunch she had prepared the night before. Before leaving, she stopped at her son's bedroom. Jason and Matthew were sleeping. The younger one, 15 years old, sprawled across the bed, snoring softly. Jason, about to turn 19, was sleeping sitting up, with his head resting on the makeshift desk. Open books and notebooks indicated another late night of study. Nancy sighed, draped a blanket over her older son's shoulders, and left, closing the door carefully. The 5:30 bus was almost empty. Nancy settled into a back seat, watching through the window the cloudy sky that promised rain. She thought about Jason, his extraordinary talent for languages, and how life could be different if they had more opportunities. The boy spoke English fluently, knew Spanish, had started studying French, and was now obsessed with Hungarian, of all languages. All learned from used books, free apps, and endless hours at the neighborhood public library. "Morning, Mrs. Smith," greeted the security guard Sebastian when she arrived at Tech Nexus. "Rain's coming, huh?" "Good morning, Mr. Sebastian. Yes, looks like we're getting wet today," she replied, punching her time card at exactly 6:30. Punctuality was one of the few things no one could take from her. As she headed up to the locker room, Nancy thought about the month's bills. The rent had increased. The internet was about to be cut off again, and groceries were getting more expensive. Her salary as a cleaning assistant barely covered the basics, even with the extra cleaning jobs she did on weekends. Jason had asked for time off from the corner store where he worked part-time to study for college entrance exams, and that meant less money coming in. In the locker room, she met Marlene and Josephine, her team colleagues. "Girl, did you see that Oliver arrived in a new car?" commented Marlene as she tied her hair back. "One of those imports must have cost a fortune." "That man doesn't know how to spend money," replied Josephine. "Meanwhile, we've been here without a raise for 2 years. Nancy just smiled, tying her own hair with a discreet hairnet. She preferred not to feed gossip about the company's CEO, though she silently agreed. Oliver Newman was known for his ostentatious style and volatile temperament. He ran Tech Nexus with an iron fist and inflated ego, displaying material achievements like trophies. By 7 o'clock, Nancy was already pushing her cleaning cart through the mirrored corridors of the 12th floor, where the executive offices were located. She passed hurried executives who barely noticed her presence. It was like being a ghost. Everyone saw the results of her work, but no one really saw her. "Excuse me," she murmured when entering rooms, though she rarely received a response beyond a distracted nod. She cleaned desks, emptied trash bins, polished glass. In some rooms, she caught fragments of conversations about markets, investments, numbers that seemed too abstract for her reality. During lunch break, Nancy received a message from Jason. The home Wi-Fi had been cut off, as feared. He asked if he could come pick her up after work, taking advantage of the opportunity to study in the company reception, which had free internet. "You can come, son. I finish at 3:30, she replied, feeling a mix of sadness about the situation and pride in the boy's determination. When she returned to work, Nancy noticed unusual activity. Employees were talking in groups, exchanging glances. Something seemed out of the ordinary. As she passed by the president's corridor, she saw Oliver gesturing nervously inside his glass office. Next to him, Camilla Davis, the financial director, seemed equally tense. "It's some important document," whispered Denise, the floor secretary, when Nancy came in to clean the women's bathroom. "It arrived early this morning, and everyone's going crazy trying to understand what it says." "Document?" asked Nancy, more out of politeness than interest. "Yes, it came from overseas. It seems urgent, but it's in a language no one here can translate. Oliver is furious." Nancy nodded and continued her work. Executive problems weren't her business, though an idea had begun to form in her mind. At 3 o'clock, Jason arrived at the TechNexus reception. He wore a simple t-shirt, faded jeans, and carried a worn backpack full of books. He explained to the security guard that he would wait for his mother and settled discreetly on a sofa in the corner of the lobby. He took a comparative linguistics book and some notebooks from his backpack, connected to the Wi-Fi, and immersed himself in his studies. From time to time, he looked up to observe the movement. TechNexus was a different world. Well-dressed people, latest generation cell phones, conversations in English mixed with technical terms. A universe that seemed to exist in another dimension, parallel to the reality of the neighborhood where he lived. Around 3:15, he noticed unusual movement. A group of executives hurriedly came down, papers in hand, tense faces. Among them, he recognized the man from billboards and advertisements. Oliver Newman, CEO of the company. Tall, impeccably dressed, he emanated an aura of authority that made everyone around him seem smaller. "We've already tried all the online translators, all the specialized companies in the city. Nobody can solve this by tomorrow," said a middle-aged man, apparently desperate. "I don't care, I need to know what this damn document says by the end of the day," replied Oliver, his voice echoing through the lobby. "What the hell language is this?" Jason observed the scene with growing interest. He saw when Oliver, in a dramatic gesture, held up some sheets of paper. "I'm telling you, if anyone here can translate this by tomorrow, I'll pay the equivalent of my monthly salary. And you know how much that is." The declaration generated a buzz. Employees exchanged surprised glances. Some laughed nervously. Others seemed to mentally calculate the mentioned value. Jason, from his corner, managed to glimpse part of the document. His heart raced when he recognized the characters, Hungarian. It wasn't just colloquial Hungarian, but formal, probably legal. At that moment, he saw his mother coming out of the elevator. Nancy, in her impeccable uniform, crossed the lobby unnoticed, as always. When she spotted her son, her tired face lit up with a smile. "Hi, Mom," said Jason, hugging her. "Hi, son, can we go? I'm exhausted." Jason hesitated, looking again at the group of executives. The Hungarian document, the promised reward, the chance to make a difference. Everything was spinning in his mind. "Mom," he finally said, "I think I can help those people." Nancy followed her son's gaze and immediately understood. She knew that gleam in Jason's eyes, the same determination that made him study entire nights. "Are you sure?" she asked, apprehensive. "That's the company owner, son." Jason took a deep breath. "I am. It's Hungarian, Mum." "I understand Hungarian." Before Nancy could respond, Jason was already walking toward the group, with hesitant but determined steps. His mother followed him, her heart pounding, anticipating what was about to happen, the invisible finally demanding to be seen. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give a like. Tell us what city you're watching from. We'll continue. The day at TechNexus had started unusually, even before 9 in the morning, when Oliver Newman arrived at his office on the top floor. A brown envelope with foreign stamps was already waiting for him on the desk. Sandra, his secretary for more than 10 years, explained that it had been delivered by an international messenger early in the morning, with explicit instructions to be opened only by the addressee. Oliver, habitually impatient, tore open the envelope without ceremony. Inside, he found several pages with an official letterhead and formal signatures, all written in a language he didn't immediately recognize. He frowned, trying to identify a familiar word, without success. "Sandra!" he called through the intercom. "What language is this?" The secretary entered hastily, adjusted her glasses, and examined the documents. "It seems to be Hungarian, maybe, or some Eastern European language. I'm not sure." "Hungarian?" repeated Oliver, perplexed. "And why the hell would someone send me documents in Hungarian?" His family had Portuguese and Italian origins, without any connection to Hungary that he knew of. He didn't do business in that region, nor did he have friends or acquaintances from there. The mystery only increased his usual irritation. "I need to know what it says here. Urgent. Call the international relations people." While waiting, Oliver studied the official stamps and seals. There was something about the document that suggested importance, perhaps the letterhead, or the formal signatures in blue ink. On the last page, He identified numbers that looked like monetary values, followed by many zeros. That immediately piqued his curiosity. Richard Mendez, Director of International Relations, arrived accompanied by his assistant, Patricia. Both examined the document with confused expressions. "We don't have anyone who speaks Hungarian in the company, Oliver," Richard explained. "I can try to contact a translation company, but it will take time." "How long?" "Official documents with this length. At least a week for a certified translation." "A week!" exploded Oliver, hitting the desk. "That won't do. Look at these numbers here. It could be something important, something urgent." Patricia timidly suggested, "We could try an online translator as a temporary solution." Without waiting for her to finish, Oliver was already typing on his computer, trying various automatic translation services. The results were disastrous. Disconnected sentences, meaningless words, nothing that clarified the document's content. The morning progressed with frustrated attempts. The legal department was called. IT specialists tried more advanced software. The marketing team suggested international contacts. Nothing worked. Oliver, known for his intolerance of problems without immediate solution, grew increasingly irritated. During lunch break, Camilla Davis, the financial director, and one of the few people who dared to confront Oliver, entered the room. "We found a seal from the Hungarian Ministry of Justice on the document," she informed, "and the word örökség appears several times. According to Google, it means inheritance." Oliver stopped pacing the room. "Inheritance?" "Yes, and there are references to a name, Newman. We believe it might be something related to your family." For the first time that day, Oliver was silent. He vaguely remembered family stories about a great-uncle who had emigrated to Eastern Europe during World War II. He had never paid much attention to these stories, considering them part of family folklore without practical importance. "If it's an inheritance," continued Camilla, "there may be legal deadlines involved. We need to understand this document quickly." After a few more hours of fruitless attempts, Oliver decided to go down to the reception personally, where a larger team was gathered, trying to find solutions. The frustration was palpable. It was at this moment, in a characteristic burst of impatience, that he made the declaration that would echo throughout the company. "I'm fed up. If anyone here can translate this by tomorrow, I'll pay the equivalent of my monthly salary, and you know how much that is." The momentary silence that followed was broken by murmurs and surprised looks. Everyone there knew the rumors about Oliver's stratospheric salary, a monthly amount that could buy a luxury car or make a down payment on an apartment in the best neighborhood in the city. "He's not serious," whispered an analyst to another. "Of course not, it's just pressure," replied the colleague. "Besides, who here would know Hungarian?" Oliver's words, however, were already circulating. Text messages, discreet calls, comments in the corridors. In minutes, all employees knew about the offer. A mixture of skepticism and curiosity took over the environment. Was the promise real? Would Oliver fulfill it? And more importantly, would someone have the ability to translate that document? As the excitement grew, Nancy Smith was silently cleaning the rooms on the 8th floor. She caught fragments of conversation about the Hungarian document and the promised reward. She immediately thought of Jason. Her son had been studying Hungarian for almost 2 years, fascinated by the complexity of the language that few in America were interested in learning. Would he be able to translate an official document? Perhaps not completely, but he would certainly understand more than any automatic translator. She wondered if she should mention this to anyone. The idea of Jason, a young man from the outskirts without a diploma or credentials, translating documents for executives, seemed absurd. Moreover, she knew the corporate environment well. People like her and her son were rarely taken seriously. She decided to wait to talk to Jason when he came to pick her up. In the legal department, tension was increasing. After consulting international contacts, they discovered that the document seemed to have a response deadline, something close to 48 hours. If it was really an inheritance, as they suspected, not responding in time could mean losing legal rights. "We've already tried 3 translation companies. None can deliver before 5 business days," informed Gus Lewis, from legal to Oliver. "And without quality guarantee, since Hungarian is an extremely specific language." "What about that embassy? The consulate?" questioned Oliver, visibly tense. "Closed for administrative renovation until the end of the month," replied Deborah Fields, Gus's assistant. "We sent emails, but the automatic response says that urgent matters should be handled by the consulate in New York." "And the consulate in New York?" "Responds within 10 business days." Oliver swore, running his hands through his graying hair. The situation was unprecedented for him, a problem that his money, influence, and contacts couldn't solve immediately. The feeling of powerlessness made him furious. The day advanced, and the excitement in the company grew proportionally. Marketing department employees suggested posting the document on specialized language forums. The IT team tried more sophisticated translation algorithms. Some employees were calling acquaintances with possible Eastern European connections. The promise of reward, although few believed it would materialize, served as fuel for the general mobilization. At 3 in the afternoon, when Oliver went down to the reception again to check on the progress, the frustration was evident on his normally confident face. It was at this moment that he noticed, for the first time, Jason's presence. A thin young man in simple clothes, observing the scene from the corner of the reception. Under normal circumstances, Oliver wouldn't even register the existence of someone like him. Just another anonymous, another invisible in his world of luxury and power. But that day, something was different. Perhaps it was the young man's attentive expression, or the way his eyes fixed on the documents. Oliver didn't make contact, but for a brief moment their worlds crossed. The corporate magnate and the janitor's son, connected by the invisible thread of a mysterious document that was about to change both their destinies. Nancy, coming out of the elevator at that exact moment, felt a tightness in her chest, seeing her son observing the scene. She knew that look. It was the same Jason had as a child, faced with a particularly challenging puzzle, the look of someone who already knew the answer, but was calculating whether or not to share it with the world. What Nancy didn't imagine was that, in the next few hours, the invisible structures that sustained the hierarchies of that company would be shaken forever. And it would all begin with a simple phrase that Jason was about to utter. "Excuse me." Jason's voice sounded lower than he intended. In the bustle of the reception, no one seemed to notice. Nancy, standing a few steps behind her son, felt her heart racing. She knew this environment well. She knew how people like them were easily ignored, made invisible by an undeclared but deeply rooted hierarchy. "Excuse me," Jason repeated, now more firmly. This time some heads turned. A receptionist looked at him with slight irritation, probably imagining he was going to ask about a job vacancy or deliver a resume at the wrong time. Jason took a deep breath, aware of the looks that were now fixed on him, evaluating his simple clothes, his hair without a professional cut, every detail that marked him as an outsider. I think I can help with the document," he said, pointing to the sheets in Richard Mendez's hand, who was standing near Oliver. "It's Hungarian, isn't it?" A brief silence was followed by discreet laughter. Someone murmured something about audacity, another about funny interns. Richard, embarrassed, looked at Oliver, who in turn was studying Jason with an expression between curiosity and disdain. "And you would be?" asked Oliver, raising an eyebrow. "Jason Smith." "I'm waiting for my mom," he replied, discreetly pointing to Nancy, who took a step forward, her light blue cleaning staff uniform in contrast with the suits and tailored outfits around her. "I've been studying Hungarian for almost 2 years. More laughter, now less disguised. Camilla Davis, however, stepped forward. "You really understand Hungarian?" she asked with genuine interest. "Can you read this?" She extended one of the sheets. Jason took it carefully as if it were a precious object. His eyes scanned the lines, his lips moving silently as he processed the words. The reception gradually became quieter, everyone watching that improbable scene. It's an official document," Jason began hesitantly. "From the Hungarian Ministry of Justice. It has to do with a property. No, an inheritance. Something about identifying legitimate heirs of... I think it's a property in Budapest." Oliver's eyebrows rose. Camilla exchanged significant looks with Richard. The silence was now total. "Continue," encouraged Camilla. "What else does it say?" Jason continued, translating slowly, sometimes stopping to think of the correct word. He explained about legal deadlines, necessary documentation, estimated values. When he mentioned the full name that appeared in the document, "Anthony Edward Newman," Oliver exclaimed. My great-uncle. The family always commented that he went to Europe during the war, but we never knew exactly what happened to him. For a moment, the CEO seemed to have completely forgotten who was providing that information. The invisible barrier between worlds had momentarily dissolved in the face of the urgency of the situation. According to the document, he acquired significant properties in Budapest, continued Jason, gaining confidence as he progressed. He died without direct heirs. After genealogical research, they identified you as the closest living relative. And the deadline? Asked Gus Lewis from legal, now completely engaged. Is there a deadline for response? Jason looked for the information in the text. Yes, 48 hours after official receipt to express interest, then 30 days to send the complete documentation. The tension in the air was palpable. Oliver, normally centered on his own importance, seemed genuinely impressed. However, the expression of some around began to change. The initial shock gave way to distrust, skepticism, even resentment. How do we know he's translating correctly? Questioned Paul Simmons, a project manager known for his defensive posture. No offense, but he's a kid. No certifications, no training. Why would we trust something so important to him? The question hung in the air, uncomfortable. Nancy, who until then observed with silent pride, felt her stomach sink. She knew that tone well. The polite disqualification, the selective doubt that always appeared when someone like her son dared to demonstrate competence in spaces that were not designated for him. We can test it, suggested Camilla, pragmatic. We have that contact at the Brazilian embassy in Prague. It's not Hungary, but it's close. Maybe they can help us verify some key phrases by phone. Oliver nodded. Do that. Meanwhile, he turned to Jason, studying him as if seeing him for the first time. You, come to my office. Bring your books, or whatever you use to study. Jason looked at his mother, who nodded discreetly. He picked up his worn backpack and followed Oliver to the elevator, aware of the looks that accompanied him, some curious, others clearly distrustful. On the way to the top floor, the silence was uncomfortable. Jason, who had never been in such a luxurious elevator, kept his eyes fixed on his own feet. Oliver, in turn, alternated between examining the young man and checking messages on his cell phone, as if he couldn't decide if the situation deserved his full attention. So, he finally said when the doors opened on the executive floor, why Hungarian, of all possible languages? The question caught Jason by surprise. It was something many asked, usually with tones of mockery. It started by chance, he replied, following Oliver down the luxurious corridor. I found an online forum for rare languages. I liked the complexity, the challenges. Hungarian has a completely different structure from Latin languages. It's like solving a puzzle every day. Oliver murmured something inaudible in response, opening the door to his office, a spacious room with a panoramic view of the city. Jason had never been in such a place. For a moment he forgot the tension, marveling at the view, the elegant furniture, the feeling of being literally above the city where he had always lived. Sit down, ordered Oliver, indicating a chair in front of his desk. I want you to translate a few more excerpts. Meanwhile, on the floor below, Nancy was facing her own kind of scrutiny. Julie Vasquez, the human resources manager, had called her to a small meeting room. Nancy, I understand that you're proud of your son, Julie began with a tone that tried to sound understanding, but revealed rigidity. But we need to discuss some issues of professional conduct. Conduct, ma'am? Asked Nancy, immediately feeling defensive. Yes, discussing confidential company matters with family members is a serious violation. If you commented about the document at home— I didn't comment on anything, interrupted Nancy, indignant. Jason came to pick me up because our internet was cut off. He was studying in the reception when everything happened. Julie didn't seem convinced. In any case, having non-employee family members in restricted areas of the company— The reception isn't restricted, and now he's with Mr. Newman because he was invited. The silent confrontation between the two women was interrupted when the door opened. It was Camilla Davis. Julie, we need your support to organize an urgent video conference with Budapest, she said, and then noticed Nancy. Oh, you're the young man's mother, right? Impressive what your son did. Where did he learn Hungarian like that? The change in atmosphere was immediate. Julie retreated, her authoritarian countenance replaced by a professional smile. Nancy briefly explained Jason's passion for languages, his self-discipline, the hours at the public library. Extraordinary, commented Camilla. You know, we're always looking for unusual talents for our international area. Maybe we can talk later about opportunities for him. On the 13th floor, Jason continued his translation. Now, with access to a more complete online dictionary that Oliver provided, he progressed more quickly. The CEO alternated between taking notes, sending messages, and observing the young man with growing curiosity. Here, Jason pointed to a specific paragraph. It says that the main property is a historic building in the Buda district, valued at approximately, well, converting to dollars, it would be something around 15 million. Oliver almost dropped his pen. 15 million? Dollars, yes. But there are other smaller properties and some financial investments too. Oliver's expression completely changed. What had begun as an irritating problem now revealed itself as a significant opportunity. His attitude toward Jason was also transforming, from initial distrust to reluctant respect. At that moment, Sandra, the secretary, entered hurriedly. "Mr. Newman, we managed to contact an embassy official in Budapest. He's on the line." Oliver picked up the phone, speaking in English. On the other end, a voice confirmed, yes, the document was legitimate. Yes, it was a significant inheritance. And yes, the deadline was real. If there was no formal manifestation in the next 24 hours, the assets would revert to the Hungarian state. Upon hanging up, Oliver faced Jason with a new expression, something between admiration and calculation. "It seems you were right," he finally said. "We need to prepare a formal response in Hungarian immediately." Jason nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility. It wasn't just an academic exercise now. It was something real with real consequences. For a brief moment, he thought about the salary promised by Oliver earlier. Was that promise still valid? Or had it been just a moment of frustration, forgotten as soon as the solution appeared? He decided not to ask. For now he would focus on the task at hand. He had already gone too far to turn back. A young man from the outskirts in the CEO's office, translating documents that could be worth millions. An opportunity that comes once in a lifetime. His duty now was to prove, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that he deserved to be there. As he began to write the response in Hungarian, he didn't notice the calculating look Oliver gave him. The look of someone who was already planning how to deal with the impulsive promise he had made hours earlier in front of the entire company. The news spread through TechNexus with the speed of a digital virus, from department to department, from message to message. The janitor's son was translating Hungarian documents for Oliver Newman, and they weren't just any documents. There was talk of inheritance of millions of properties abroad. The buzz in the corridors was constant, with employees discreetly abandoning their desks to get coffee and thus gather more information. In Oliver's office, Jason was finishing writing a formal response in Hungarian. His hands trembled slightly, partly from fatigue, partly from pressure. He had spent the last 2 hours poring over online dictionaries, checking legal terms, structuring phrases with the necessary formality. Oliver, initially skeptical, now observed with poorly disguised admiration the ease with which the young man navigated the complex language. "Done," Jason finally said, handing a printed sheet to Oliver. "This is the formal expression of interest. It explains that you are indeed Anthony Edward Newman's grandnephew, confirms the desire to claim the inheritance, and requests instructions for the next steps." Oliver took the document, studying the incomprehensible words as if he could understand them. "And how will I know if it's correct?" "We can email it to the contact in Budapest, who confirmed the authenticity of the original document. They can verify it." The CEO nodded, passing the document to Sandra, who was waiting for instructions. "Scan and send it immediately." While they waited for a response, an uncomfortable silence settled in the room. Jason, exhausted by the intense mental effort, looked out the window. The afternoon was advancing, the riverside sky darkening with storm clouds. He thought about his mother. Where was she? Had she left without him? He checked his cell phone, but there were no messages. "So," began Oliver, breaking the silence, "where did you learn Hungarian? Any specific course?" "No, sir, self-taught. I started with free apps, then found some used books. I frequent an online forum where I practice with native speakers." "Impressive," commented Oliver, and it seemed genuine. "How old are you?" 19. I mean almost. Next week." "And where do you work?" part-time at a corner store in the neighborhood. I'm also studying for college entrance exams. Oliver nodded, absorbing the information. For a moment there seemed to be a flash of recognition, perhaps remembering his own beginnings, before the corporate empire, before the imported cars and panoramic offices. But the moment quickly passed when the door suddenly opened. It was Paul Simmons, project manager, holding some sheets of paper with an alarmed expression. "Oliver, we have a problem. Part of the original document is missing." "What do you mean missing?" questioned Oliver, standing up. "Pages 3 and 4. They're nowhere to be found. We've checked all the rooms where the document circulated today." Oliver frowned, instinctively looking at Jason. The young man immediately perceived the implicit suspicion and felt his blood freeze. "I didn't take anything," he said quickly. "I only translated what I was given." Paul cleared his throat, uncomfortable. "Well, it's strange that just today, with unauthorized people circulating in executive areas—" "Are you accusing me of something?" asked Jason, his voice betraying his anxiety. Oliver raised his hand, silencing both. "Nobody is accusing anybody. But we need to find those pages. They may contain crucial information." At that moment, Nancy appeared at the door, visibly worried. "Jason? Is everything okay? They're saying downstairs that—" "Everything's fine, Mom," interrupted Jason, although his tone said otherwise. Julie Vasquez appeared right behind Nancy, with a severe expression. "Mr. Newman, we need to discuss security protocols. We have unauthorized people in restricted areas, missing documents." The tension in the air was palpable. Jason felt everyone's gaze upon him. No longer of curiosity or admiration, but of suspicion. It was a familiar feeling, something he had faced all his life in the elegant establishments he occasionally needed to frequent. The look that said, "You don't belong here." Oliver seemed about to respond when his phone rang. It was Camilla Davis. "Oliver, we found the pages. They were with Edward from marketing. He took them to try to translate on his own, without telling anyone." The relief was immediate. Oliver announced the news, and the tension in the environment visibly decreased. Paul murmured something like an apology and hurriedly withdrew. Julie, however, maintained her inflexible posture. "Even so, Mr. Newman, we have protocols. Visitors without credentials, employees bringing family members." It was Camilla who intervened, entering the room with the recovered pages. "Julie, I think we can discuss protocols later. Now we have an urgent situation to resolve, and this young man," she pointed to Jason, "is our best chance to do so." Julie retreated, displeased. Nancy, still at the door, exchanged a grateful look with Camilla. There was something in that look, a silent communication between women who, despite the obvious social differences, seemed to recognize in each other the shared experience of navigating hostile environments. The moment was interrupted by Secretary Sandra, who entered hurriedly. "Mr. Newman, the office in Budapest responded. They want to do a video conference immediately." The next few minutes were busy. The technical team quickly prepared the conference room, checking connections, testing audio. Jason was strategically placed next to Oliver, ready to translate. Nancy, not knowing exactly what to do, remained discreetly at the back of the room, invisible as always, but this time watching with contained pride as her son was the center of attention. The screen lit up, revealing a middle-aged man in an elegant office. He spoke English with a strong Hungarian accent, introducing himself as Dr. Kovacs, representative of the law firm responsible for the succession process. The conversation began in English, with Oliver explaining the situation and confirming his identity as Anthony Edwards' grandnephew. But soon, technical terms, specific documents, legal procedures emerged that the Hungarian lawyer's limited English couldn't adequately express. "Perhaps it would be better to continue in Hungarian," suggested Dr. Kovacs, looking at Jason, who had been introduced as a translator. What followed impressed everyone in the room. Jason, initially nervous, gained confidence as the conversation flowed. He quickly translated the lawyer's words to Oliver and vice versa, navigating with surprising ease through the complex legal terms. At times, he asked direct questions to the lawyer to clarify points, demonstrating not just knowledge of the language, but understanding of the subject. "He's asking about documents proving kinship," translated Jason. "Birth certificates, marriage, death that establish the succession line between you and your great-uncle." Oliver frowned. That could be complicated. Some documents might be with my mother in the countryside. Others might not even exist anymore. Jason translated the concern, and the lawyer responded at length. The young man listened attentively before turning to Oliver. He says they can accept sworn statements in place of some documents, as long as there are witnesses. He also mentioned that DNA tests can be requested in cases where documentation is insufficient. The video conference continued for almost an hour. Details were discussed, deadlines established, procedures explained. Jason remained firm, translating accurately, sometimes stopping to check terms on his cell phone, but always resuming with confidence. When they finally said goodbye with the commitment to send the preliminary documents in the next 24 hours, an admiring silence took over the room. The executives exchanged impressed looks. Even Julie Vasquez seemed to have softened her critical stance. "Well," Oliver finally said, "it seems we have work to do." The following hours were of intense activity. Jason was installed in a meeting room with access to computers and materials needed to prepare the documents in Hungarian. Nancy, who should have left at 3:30, remained at the company, alternating between proudly observing her son and helping with small tasks, fetching water, organizing papers, bringing snacks that mysteriously appeared by Camilla's order. Around 7 in the evening, when the rain finally poured down on Riverside, Jason was finalizing the translation of the last document. He was exhausted but satisfied. He had not only survived the initial scrutiny, but had proven his worth unquestionably. Oliver, who regularly entered and left the room to check on progress, now treated him with reluctant but perceptible respect. Camilla Davis was the last to pass by the room before leaving. She paused at the door, observing Jason and Nancy, who was discreetly organizing the used papers. "Do you need a ride? It's raining hard." The offer caught both by surprise. Nancy, accustomed to returning by bus in any weather condition, didn't know how to respond immediately. "That would be very kind," Jason finally replied. "Thank you." As they prepared to leave, Jason noticed a low-voiced conversation between Camilla and Oliver in the corridor. He couldn't hear the content, but noticed the occasional glance in his direction. They were talking about him, certainly, about what he had done, about the promised payment. The promise. Throughout the whole turmoil of the day, he had barely thought about it. Now, with the work practically completed, the question resurfaced. Would Oliver really pay the equivalent of his monthly salary? It was an amount that could completely change the Smith family's life. It would pay debts, ensure internet for studies, maybe even allow Jason to dedicate himself fully to college entrance exams. But how to collect on this? How to remind a CEO of a promise made in a moment of desperation, without seeming self-interested or ungrateful for the opportunity? Jason packed his things slowly, thoughtful. Through the window, he observed the heavy rain that punished the city. Somehow, he felt that storm marked a transition, not just in the riverside sky, but in his own life. What had begun as an ordinary day had transformed into something extraordinary, opening doors he didn't even know existed. What he still didn't know was whether these doors would remain open when the sun shone again. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give a like. Tell us what city you're watching from. We'll continue. The next morning dawned clear after the storm. The riverside sky displayed an almost provocative blue after the previous night's torrential rain. In the still wet streets, puddles reflected the sun like small mirrors scattered across the asphalt. Nancy woke up at her usual time, at 4:30, but this time found a message on her cell phone. It was from Camilla Davis. "Good morning, Nancy. Oliver has requested your and Jason's presence at the company at 9 a.m. A company car will come to pick you up at 8:15. Please confirm." The message, sent at 11:47 p.m. the previous night, left Nancy momentarily without action. In 15 years working at TechNexus, she had never received any special treatment. The simple fact that someone from the upper echelon had her personal number and sent a direct message was already surprising. The offer of transportation, then, was completely unprecedented. "Mom, what's wrong?" asked Jason, entering the kitchen with eyes still heavy with sleep. He had worked until late, mentally reviewing the translations, worried about possible errors. Nancy showed him the message. "It seems it's not over yet." "Could it be about the payment?" asked Jason, verbalizing the thought both had been avoiding since the previous night. Nancy shrugged, trying not to feed expectations. "Let's get ready. The car arrives in an hour." At exactly 8:15, a black executive sedan stopped in front of the modest building where they lived. The driver, in a suit and tie, opened the door for mother and son with the same deference he would show to executives. The neighbors watched from the window, curious about that unusual scene. "Ms. Smith and Mr. Jason," confirmed the driver. "I'm Raphael. I'll take you to TechNexus." During the journey, neither of them spoke much. Jason looked out the window, observing the city he knew so well, but which seemed different viewed from inside an executive car with air conditioning and leather seats. Nancy nervously adjusted the uniform she had decided to wear, even without being sure if she would work that day. Upon arriving at TechNexus, the reception was surprising. Sandra, Oliver's secretary, personally awaited them in the lobby. "Good morning. Mr. Newman is eager to see you. Please follow me." In the elevator, Nancy whispered to her son, "I'm nervous." Jason squeezed her hand discreetly. "Everything will be fine, Mom. We did the right thing." When the elevator doors opened on the top floor, they found not only Oliver but also Camilla, Richard, Gus from legal, and other executives gathered in the conference room. On the table, there were organized folders, printed documents, and an atmosphere of expectation. "Ah, you've arrived," exclaimed Oliver, with uncharacteristic animation. "Please come in. We have a lot to discuss." Nancy and Jason settled into the indicated chairs, feeling the weight of the gazes upon them. The room, normally reserved for high-level corporate decisions, had never received a cleaning assistant and her son before. The feeling was as dislocated as it was significant. "First," began Oliver, "the good news. We received official confirmation from the office in Budapest. The preliminary documentation was accepted. The inheritance is real, and I am indeed the legitimate heir." Murmurs of approval traveled around the room. Oliver continued, now with visible enthusiasm. "The values are even greater than we imagined. In addition to the historic building, there are financial investments accumulated for decades. We're talking about an estimated assets of about 40 million euros. A stunned silence took over the room. It was a considerable fortune even by Oliver Newman's standards. "And all this," he continued, looking directly at Jason, "was only possible thanks to your extraordinary ability with Hungarian. Without you, we would have missed the deadline, and consequently, all this heritage." Jason nodded, uncomfortable with the praise and with the mention of such astronomical values. 40 million euros was an impossible amount to imagine for someone who had grown up counting coins for bus fare. "Now," continued Oliver, "we have to discuss the next steps. We'll need more translations, continuous communications with the law firm, possibly even a trip to Budapest." Gus Lewis from legal took the floor. "Jason, we would like to propose a formal service provision contract. Your expertise is clearly valuable for this process." Nancy and Jason exchanged surprised looks. "A contract? That wasn't in the plans." "What kind of contract?" asked Jason cautiously. "Specialized consultancy," explained Gus. "Hourly rate, expense coverage, possibly even participation in the process as a whole." It was a tempting proposal, no doubt. But the unaddressed question hung in the air, the promise made by Oliver the day before, in front of the entire company. The monthly salary as a reward for the translation. As if reading his thoughts, Camilla Davis intervened. "I believe we also have another pending matter, don't we, Oliver?" All eyes turned to the CEO, who visibly changed his posture. His enthusiasm gave way to a more calculating demeanor, closer to his usual expression as a negotiator. "Yes, indeed," he replied, adjusting his tie. "Yesterday, in a moment of, let's say, pressure, I made a declaration. I promised the equivalent of my monthly salary to whoever could translate the document." The tension in the room was palpable. Some executives seemed uncomfortable, others curious about how the situation would unfold. "Normally," continued Oliver, "declarations made under pressure could be considered non-binding from a legal point of view. A lawyer would argue that there was no real intention to create a contractual obligation." Jason's heart sank. It was the beginning of the speech he already expected, the elaborate explanation of why the promise would not be fulfilled. He felt his mother's hand squeeze his under the table. "However," continued Oliver, surprising everyone, "that's not how I conduct my business. A promise is a promise, regardless of the circumstances." He gestured to Richard, who slid an envelope across the table toward Jason. "This is a check for the exact amount of my monthly salary." As promised, Jason took the envelope with trembling hands, unable to open it. The room was in complete silence, everyone attentively observing his reaction. Can I ask how much it is?" he finally questioned, his voice almost a whisper. Oliver smiled for the first time without any trace of arrogance. $375,000. Nancy let out a muffled exclamation. It was more money than she would earn in 10 years of work at TechNexus. Jason felt his head spin, unable to process the number. That's a lot of money," he finally managed to say. "It's the fair value for what you did," replied Oliver. "Without your intervention, I would have lost 40 million euros. $375,000 seems even little in comparison." The logic was impeccable, even if the reality seemed surreal. Jason looked at the envelope in his hands as if it were an alien object. "Thank you," he said simply, unable to find more elaborate words. Camilla smiled, visibly satisfied with how the situation had unfolded. There was something in her expression that suggested she had played an important role in Oliver's decision. "Moreover," continued the CEO, "we would like to discuss your future, Jason. Someone with your talent for languages and your capacity for self-taught learning is exactly the type of talent that TechNexus values." "My future," repeated Jason, still stunned. "We are proposing a personalized program, paid internship in our international area, flexibility for your university studies, possibility of growth within the company." It was an offer that Jason had never imagined receiving. Just 2 days ago, he was studying Hungarian at home, with the internet about to be cut off, worried about how he would adequately study for college entrance exams while working at the corner store. "And as for your mother," added Oliver, turning to Nancy, "we would like to discuss a reclassification of function. Your time with the company and your dedication deserve recognition." Nancy, who until then had observed everything in respectful silence, couldn't contain her surprise. "Reclassification?" "Supervision of the General Services team," explained Camilla, "with a proportional salary increase, of course." The meeting continued for another hour, discussing details, signing preliminary documents, establishing the next steps both for the inheritance process and for Jason and Nancy's new roles. When they finally left the conference room, mother and son walked in silence to the elevator, both too stunned to formulate coherent thoughts. Inside the empty elevator, Nancy finally spoke. "You deserve all this, son. You always deserve it." Jason looked at the envelope in his hands, then at his mother, the woman who had dedicated her entire life to raising her children alone, working 2, sometimes 3 jobs, never complaining, always encouraging his studies, even when it seemed impossible. "We deserve it, Mom, both of us." When the elevator doors opened on the ground floor, they encountered an unexpected scenario. Employees from various departments were gathered in the lobby, apparently waiting. As soon as they saw Jason and Nancy, they began to applaud. It was a spontaneous reaction, born not just from admiration for the feat itself, but from the symbolism of the moment. Someone who would normally be invisible in corporate corridors had become the center of attention, not through connections or privileges, but through genuine merit. Among the applause, Jason noticed something even more significant. For the first time since he had begun frequenting environments, mostly occupied by people from higher social classes, he didn't feel out of place. He was no longer just the janitor's son or the kid from the outskirts. He was simply Jason Smith, the young man who mastered Hungarian and saved a fortune. As he walked among colleagues who now greeted him as an equal, Jason thought about the next steps. The money in the envelope would solve immediate problems, allow better study conditions, perhaps even the purchase of a better apartment. But the real change was beyond the financial. It was in the doors that were opening, in the possibilities that were multiplying, in the recognition he had never experienced before, and more importantly, in his mother's gaze, which for the first time in many years didn't carry the weight of constant worry. Just pride. A pride that was worth more than all the checks in the world. 3 weeks had passed since that transformative morning at TechNexus. The check for $375,000, initially kept with almost religious fear by Jason and Nancy, had already been deposited. The first decision was to buy their own apartment, Nothing luxurious, but spacious, well located, with a small office where Jason could study without distractions. The move was scheduled for the end of the month. The fall painted the riverside trees with amber tones as Jason walked through the TechNexus corridors with a discreet confidence he had never possessed before. He wore new clothes, dress pants and a well-cut shirt, without ostentation, but with the dignity of someone who now occupied a respected position. The badge hanging around his neck said, Jason Smith, language consultant, a function created especially for him. His routine was now divided between the company 3 times a week and the university, where he had secured a special place in the language arts program with an emphasis on linguistics and translation. TechNexus, fulfilling Oliver's promise, financed his studies and adjusted his schedule as needed. "Good morning, Jason," greeted Sandra, Oliver's secretary, when he arrived at the executive floor. "They're already waiting for you in the video conference room." Jason thanked her and continued down the corridor, noticing how the looks had changed. They were no longer of distrust or curiosity, but of genuine respect. Some executives even stopped to exchange a few words, asking about his studies or the progress of the inheritance process. In the video conference room, he found Oliver, Camilla, and Gus from legal, preparing for another meeting with the Hungarian law firm. In the past few weeks, they had made significant progress in the succession process. Oliver's legitimacy as heir had been confirmed, essential documents sent, bureaucratic procedures initiated. The next step would be a trip to Budapest to finalize the process and see the properties. "Ah, Jason, punctual as always," commented Oliver, who had developed an almost paternal relationship with the young man. The experience of almost losing a fortune by not understanding a foreign language had transformed his vision of talents and opportunities. "Ready for another round of negotiations with Dr. Kovacs?" Jason smiled, adjusting his headphones. "Always ready." He promised that today we would discuss the details of the main property. The screen lit up, revealing the elegant office in Budapest. Dr. Kovacs appeared, accompanied by 2 assistants and a stack of documents. The conversation began in English, with the usual greetings, and soon switched to Hungarian, with Jason translating simultaneously. As he worked, Jason reflected on how his life had changed in such a short time. A month ago, he was worried about the internet being cut off. Today, he was translating international negotiations involving millions. The talent that once seemed just a curious hobby, with no practical application in the real world, was now his gateway to a universe of possibilities. The video conference lasted almost 2 hours. At the end, Oliver seemed satisfied. The details of the trip were settled, final documents specified, values confirmed. The official transfer of the inheritance was scheduled to occur in approximately 1 month. "Impeccable as always, Jason," praised Camilla when the call ended. "Your command of legal terms has improved considerably." "I've been specifically studying legal vocabulary," explained Jason. "The university has been helping me a lot with that." As they organized the meeting documents, Gus casually commented, "By the way, have you seen what's happening on social media? Your story leaked, Jason. It's everywhere." Jason frowned, surprised. "What do you mean?" Camilla showed her tablet, where a series of publications on various platforms told, with varying degrees of accuracy, the story of the young man from the outskirts who saved a fortune for a millionaire CEO and was rewarded with an astronomical check. "I'll translate for that," and invisible value were the most popular hashtags, accompanied by heated debates about meritocracy, opportunities, recognition of marginalized talents, and social inequality. Economics blogs discussed the value of specialization in rare skills. Career sites analyzed the case as an example of how unconventional competencies could be monetized. "This is unexpected," commented Jason, uncomfortable with the sudden exposure. "Welcome to the digital age," replied Oliver, without seeming particularly bothered. "Anyway, this has generated excellent publicity for TechNexus. It shows that we value talents regardless of origin or traditional training. In fact, the repercussion had been so positive that the marketing department was already studying ways to incorporate the story into the company's institutional image." Oliver's transformation from ruthless CEO to visionary who recognizes hidden talents was too powerful a narrative to be ignored. Upon leaving the meeting, Jason received a message from his mother. Nancy, now supervisor of the General Services team, invited him to lunch at the company's new restaurant, a benefit that previously wasn't available to employees in her sector, but that she had managed to extend to her entire team after assuming the position. At the restaurant, he found Nancy sitting with Marlene and Josephine, her former cleaning colleagues, now part of the team she supervised. The three were talking animatedly, a scenario that would have been unthinkable weeks ago, when they barely had time for a quick break in the locker room. "Son," exclaimed Nancy upon seeing him, her face lighting up with a smile. "How was the meeting?" "Productive," replied Jason, sitting down. "We're almost finalizing everything. Oliver wants me to go to Budapest with him next month." "Budapest?" repeated Marlene, impressed. "Who would have thought, huh? Our boy traveling to Europe?" Jason smiled, still not completely accustomed to the admiration he now received. As they ate, he observed his mother interacting with her colleagues. There was a new confidence in her, a posture that went beyond the slightly different uniform she now wore. Nancy spoke and was heard. She made suggestions and they were considered. She finally existed in the company's eyes. "You know," commented Josephine at one point, "your story has inspired a lot of people here, Jason. My oldest son decided to go back to studying. He said if you could do it, he can too." "And that's not all," added Nancy with pride. "The company is implementing that program I suggested, scholarships for employees' children." Jason looked at his mother, surprised. "Really? I didn't know that." "It was Camilla's idea, but based on a conversation we had. It will start next semester. Priority for technical areas and languages." It was a small silent revolution. Jason and Nancy's story had exposed the invisible layers of inequality within the company itself. Wasted talents, ignored potentials, opportunities denied not for lack of merit, but for lack of visibility. The change wasn't just about a young man translating Hungarian or a mother being promoted. It was about recognizing value where before only function was seen. After lunch, Jason passed through the company reception on his way to the university. That's when he noticed a group of young people at the entrance, apparently waiting for something. One of them, upon seeing him, nudged the others. "It's him," they whispered, not as discreetly as intended. Jason hesitated, uncomfortable with the recognition. A young woman approximately his age approached, carrying linguistics books similar to those he used himself. "Sorry to bother you," she said, visibly nervous. "I'm Lucy. I study languages at State. Your story, it's inspiring a lot of people. We were wondering if you would accept speaking at our academic center someday. About unconventional languages, self-teaching, that sort of thing." The request caught Jason by surprise. He had never imagined himself as a speaker, as an example to be followed. It was a responsibility he hadn't foreseen when he decided to offer help on that fateful day. Can I think about it?" he replied, genuinely uncertain. "Of course. Here's my contact," replied Lucy, handing him a card. "And, just so you know, I started studying Hungarian too." Jason smiled, touched by the unexpected consequence of his actions. As he left the building, he noticed how the riverside sky seemed wider, how the horizons had literally expanded. In a few weeks he would be in Budapest, personally seeing the places he previously knew only from internet photos, hearing the language he had learned on his own being spoken in the streets. At night, in his room, still in the old apartment, the new one still being prepared for the move, Jason opened his laptop. The screen displayed messages from various corners of the country and even from abroad, invitations for interviews, requests for advice on language study, messages from other young people from the outskirts seeking inspiration. Among them, a specific message caught his attention. It was from the Hungarian Embassy's scholarship program in the United States, inviting him to participate in the selection process for an academic exchange in Budapest. Someone, Jason strongly suspected Camilla, had sent his story to them. He looked at the wall where years ago he had pasted a map of Hungary printed on typing paper. Next to it, photographs of Budapest cut out from old magazines and post-it notes with Hungarian words and their translations. A dream that had seemed so distant, so impossible for a boy from the outskirts of Riverside, was now within his reach. In the kitchen, he heard his mother talking on the phone with Matthew, explaining how the rooms would be in the new apartment, how he would also have his own space to study. Her voice had a lightness that Jason hadn't heard in years. The lightness of someone who, after decades carrying the weight of the world, could finally breathe. Jason closed his eyes for a moment, absorbing the dimension of the changes. The Hungarian document that had arrived at TechNexus had transformed not only the life of Oliver Newman, the original recipient, but created a chain reaction that reached more and more people. In a way, that envelope with foreign stamps had been a kind of test, not just of linguistic knowledge, but of values. A test about who deserved to be seen, heard, valued, about how talents can emerge in the most unexpected places, about how opportunities, when distributed with justice, can transform not just individuals but entire communities. Looking out the window at the city that had always been his home, Jason realized that his journey was just beginning. The check in the bank, the new job, the university, the possible trip to Budapest, all of this was just the first chapter of a much larger story. A story about being seen, about occupying space, about transforming realities, starting with his own.